Hello again, Sociology of Sexuality students. This is the Unit 6 overview specifically on the content, specifically to give you some external additional information to help you make sense of the reading. So the step-by-step guide is up in Task 1. The content specific video, is here in Task 3. So I encourage you to go back to the other one if you're like, wait, what am I doing what? Discussion boards, that's confusing. This video is only for the actual ideas, themes, theories, and concepts that you're going to get in this unit. The step-by-step guide, again, check out the video in Task 1. So let us go take a look at Blackboard together. Our home page, everything you need on our home page. Scrolling down and you'll see that unit number 6 has now opened. Unit number 6 goes from the 1st through the 12th of November and focuses on undocuqueer immigrant rights. So you can also think about this as undocuqueer fierce advocacy for justice based on our John Jay mottos. In the United States, there's a very strong, long legacy of undocumented immigrant rights in the United States. The way that the U.S. talks about or grants citizenship or doesn't grant citizenship, the ways in which certain countries are allowed certain numbers of folks to come in and other countries have much lower numbers, how asylum is supposed to work versus how it actually works. You know, there's many, many ways in which the U.S. does not honor the ways that we talk about the right to citizenship, and also the ways that we abuse these supposed privileges that come with citizenship. So in the U.S., right, there's this undocumented immigrants' rights movement, and as a part of that, there's an undocuqueer immigrant rights movement. So for all the folks who are undocumented and also LGBTQ+, right? Studying the undocuqueer movement, which is very rich with art and research and educational outreach, it really highlights how being LGBTQ+ and undocumented impacts people's lives in the United States. So the ways in which racism, homophobia, heterosexism, transphobia, and discrimination based on an assumed immigration status or actual immigration status. This is called citizenism. That's the ism, right? Discrimination based on citizenship status or an assumption of their citizenship status, right? The assumption that citizens are superior to non-citizens, that there's unearned privileges that come with being a citizen within a particular country. Here we're talking about the United States, and how that's really woven into the social fabric of social interactions, institutions, and policies. So if you take a look at Task 3, you'll see there's quite a bit. There's 3 videos, there's several readings, there's some pictures. This picture is actually at John Jay. So pre-COVID, some students made a sign and unveiled it, so it was overlooking the atrium in the new building. And it says, "Liberation, not deportation." In the United States, deportation centers and detention centers that have sprung up in huge numbers over the past 20 years or so. These are places that are built by the same companies that build prisons, right? So they're using those same government connections. And oftentimes they get paid more per detainee than they do per prisoner for prisons. So there's also this people lobbying to ensure that people who are undocumented, that becomes something that's criminalized rather than a civil offense, and pushing law enforcement to work with, say, Homeland Security and other entities to arrest people who are undocumented. So sometimes you'll hear about raids at various factories or agricultural places or hotels. Sometimes you'll hear about raids where police will be sitting around a particular, like a elementary school when the school's about to get out, and then it will pull over all the parents and interview each person, adult guardian, to see if they have citizenship papers with them or not, if they can prove their citizenship or not, and if not, they are arrested and sent to a deportation center. Ironically, many of them languish and have no legal representation and are moved from center to center, and oftentimes these centers, again, they're not deporting people right away even. But really using it as a money-making enterprise. So the students got together and said, we need liberation, not deportation. You see butterflies here. The butterfly is definitely an undocumented immigrant rights symbol as well as something that gets used a lot for undocuqueer immigrant rights. What's also interesting is that if you look at the undocumented immigrant rights movement in the US, especially since like the 60s and maybe even a little earlier, it's LGBTQ undocumented immigrants, particularly young LGBTQ undocumented immigrants, who have been at the forefront of immigrant rights in the United States. Yet they often experience intense homophobia, heterosexism, and transphobia within mainstream immigrant rights spaces. And they face racism and anti-immigrant hate, right? What Anita Revilla and a few other scholars refer to as citizenism, right? So they're facing that racism and anti-immigrant hate within LGBTQ plus social spaces and organizing spaces. And, you know, if you think about what Geneset Gutierrez experienced, right, that is very much what we're talking about here. They are, as you will read in this unit, what Professors Battle and Pastrana note, they are connected but not comfortable. So much of activism is built around art. Art can include, you know, protest signs. Art can include, you know, the way we dress. Art can include, you know, traditional art, paintings and things like that. But art can also include words. And so poetry has become really a very powerful way, especially for young folks to share, right, their experiences. And so Yosemar Reyes is someone who is very well known as a Chicano undocuqueer activist, poet, just fierce advocate for justice all the way around. So I'm asking you to read a piece by Anita Revilla and Jose Manuel Santillana called Joteria, Identity and Consciousness, the Formation of a Collective Identity. So Joteria, right, if you're familiar with that word, joto, jota, right, it's a slur that is being reclaimed, right? So they're like, yes, I am Jota, I am Joto, right? And so within Latinx studies, especially Latinx studies that are focused on LGBTQ people's experiences, you start to see how a Joteria identity and consciousness is formed as a type of counter story to mainstream narratives, a way to both celebrate their awesomeness and not just be seen as victims, and to reclaim some of that agency that's taken away from them in so many of the stories that are told about them. So the authors see this as, you know, we ourselves are embodying theory. We are living theory, right? And so both of these scholars do a sort of historical take on themselves and their sense of various identities that are related to Joteria studies, right? And they do so as a way to reclaim and document, right, their personal testimonies and experience, something you hear of as a testimonio sometimes. They call them counter stories, they're queer stories. So first you will get, you know, Anita's background, and then you'll get Jose Manuel's background, and then you'll see how they start to theorize this as something collective. So a collective Joteria Historia. And so what does that mean, right? The complexities and contradictions of being queer, Chicano, Chicana, working class, gender fluid, and or immigrant have guided their writing and their activism. Many scholars were sort of taught not to use I, like I feel, I experienced. They argue that that's actually really oppressive, particularly to various ways of knowing. And so they find it, as they say, necessary to interweave their own experiences into their work. It's humanizing. It allows for connection and accountability. And so here, you know, I love a list. Here's 12 characteristics, right? 12 characteristics that help explain what a Joteria identity and consciousness is. And so in talking about what this Joteria identity or consciousness is, right, it's both personal and internal, but also connective and connecting. And then as you continue down, you'll see, oh, here's another list, right? So after they talk about what this, you know, sort of identity and consciousness is, right, how we decolonize our minds as part of this work, they then go on and present recommendations for organizations and movements to be more inclusive and to be transformational and transformative. I'm also asking you to read an excerpt from a book that John Jay doesn't own, so that's why we're going to the publisher's website. Queer Brown Voices, Personal Narratives of Latino, LGBT Activism. Ooh, you're starting to see this theme, right? These personal narratives, these counter stories, queer stories, testimonials, right? In order to read the excerpt, just scroll down. I know it's a little awkward. You're like, where do I go? Go down here. It says excerpt. You click on it and it pops up. And feel free, you can make it bigger, obviously, so you can see it. It's written by Salvador Vidal Ortiz, who is very well known, a very well-known queer Chicano scholar. And so this is really the introduction to the book. So you're not reading the whole book, but you're reading this introduction. And this really gives you insights into the very large number of social justice organizations that do work around undocumented immigrant rights, that do work, even if it's, say, not specifically Latinx identified, there will be, for example, like here, the Latino Caucus of the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, which was also called ACTA. Right? And so he goes through, again, these ideas of how personal narratives and oral histories are so important because oftentimes going against power, trying to create social change, questioning the status quo, those stories are buried, ignored, they're not considered as part of the mainstream. And so even being able to write yourself into history, herstory, theirstory is a really powerful way of engaging in resistance in a very violently racist, homophobic, heterosexist, transphobic, ageist world. So as always, there are bolded subheadings, so use those to guide you from personal stories to social movements, like, oh, what does that mean? Movements for social change in the late 20th century. Now we are in the 21st century, right? But we're all building on each other. And these interconnections are often invisibilized for us when we come in. And it means, that our activism is going in fits and starts. Finally, I want you to pay attention to this part here where they talk about ways of doing queer and brown. Like, what does that mean? And so, even, academics, we like to take words and really investigate their meanings. And I do mean meanings, plural. Here they're talking about how queer has two meanings. First, that common usage as an umbrella for LGBTQIA+++. So it's a non-theoretical use, but it's a way of engaging in a shorthand, right? An umbrella sort of shorthand. But queer is also a verb. The act of queering something. When an action does queer something, right, that is challenging the status quo. That is fierce advocacy for justice. Queer is a concept that responds to, really in opposition to, homonormative feelings of being gay, forms that reproduce normative binaries of gender and sexuality. At the same time, they see brown as queer because it's destabilizing categories too. In the United States, brown, serves as this as a rupture between what we always tend to see when we talk about racism, white people and black people. But what about people who are, Latinx? What about people who are Asian and South Asian? Through this, I think will help you understand more about what this activism looks like, and what we mean when we say that activism and theory have to go hand in hand, that you have to think through what you're doing, that what you're doing informs your thoughts, that one can't really exist without the other. And if it does, then it's really sort of incomplete. Finally, there's an excerpt here from the book Queer People of Color, Connected But Not Comfortable. And so this is I'm just asking you to read the intro, right? So community connection among queer people of color. So that's it for the content overview. Hopefully this helped a little bit. And as you read, maybe read and then rewatch this, and that might help give you more aha moments as well. As always, please feel free to reach out. You can, text me, email me, remind me. We can make a time to meet like this if you would like over Zoom or Skype or even a phone call. I'm very, very happy to do so. Please remember, after you finish that work that you complete the discussion board for this unit and also complete the one-sentence summary and the quick facts check-in for this unit. And another reminder, if you haven't already, that second assessment worksheet is due on November 5th, which is halfway through this particular unit. So just keep that in mind as well. Some of you actually have already turned it in very early, and it's been great grading them, and I'm really just impressed, really, with this class and your commitment to sociology of sexualities. So thank you very much. I'll be in touch.